turn it over to somebody else. And hopefully Mark will be with us by then. So I will begin by calling the meeting to order at 3:04 p.m. and ask if there are any additions or amendments to the agenda, or if someone would move its approval.
So moved.
Second.
Gio moved and Peggy seconded adoption of the agenda. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Anybody opposed? Great. I see no members of the public for comment, but would ask if anybody else, any members of the management team have anything they wanted to comment on? Oops, okay. Not oops, sorry. So the next item is approval of the board minutes, and I would welcome a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Second.
And Zach seconded. All right, so the minutes have been moved by Gio and seconded by Zach. Is there any discussion? I am seeing no indicators of discussion, so would ask that all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? And any abstentions? Great, you have approved the minutes. The next item of business is reorganization of the board. Our procedures provide for Vermont NEA to appointees to designate somebody to serve as chair, and appointees of the Vermont School Boards Association to designate someone as vice chair. And I will be happy to take care of facilitating both and then turn it over to the new appointee. This, by the way, alternates every year for those who are less familiar. So next year, VSBA will appoint a chair and Vermont NEA a vice chair, and it rotates that way accordingly. So Vermont NEA, do you have a designee that you would like to put forward as a chair?
Do we do it in the form of a motion, Tracy, or just
You
to?
know, we just, in the past, we've just said, hey, this is who we want as chair, but
Okay.
you can make a motion if you want to be tight.
We'd like it to be Joel.
Yeah, I think
Alright.
I just wasn't sure if it had to be in
one
the
of you
form
should
of a
point out that we
which I
played
would have
rock, scissors, and paper, and I lost.
So Lisa and Peggy would like it to be Joel. I think Zach and Gio, would you like to make a recommendation for vice chair?
Tracy,
Yeah.
you knew that was coming, Tracy.
Yeah,
We never talked about it, but you knew that was coming.
I know. It's totally fine. Are people comfortable with that affirmation, or would we like to vote to affirm those
I'm comfortable.
appointments? All right.
I think
Great.
yeah.
So with that, it is my pleasure to turn over the chair of the board role to Joel, and I will sit back and listen and
All right.
relax.
All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
My kind of chair.
Hey, you know, it takes precedence. I just want to know. All right. All right. Well, let's just move along here. And I think, you know, maybe that attempt at humor will not have been greeted so well by Chris, who's been planning on making this presentation for a long time. So, Chris, I'm going to just yield the floor to you for your for our review of actually 2 quarterly financial statements. I do wonder if it's necessary in your eyes to actually, you know, if we could just go to the second one, but.
I was thinking that I was going to propose that unless someone had a specific question on the September 30th financials. I don't think that there's anything compelling there that necessarily needs to be brought forward. So I would just focus on December 31st.
Good. Well,
this
with
time.
no objection, go right ahead.
Okay, and I did think that, given the irregular meeting schedule that we've been having, that going forward, what I would do is to actually place and distribute the quarterly financials when they're available and when they're ready, because obviously I've had the September ones for quite some time now. And then they could go on the next agenda and we would review whatever the last quarter was, but that I would not hold them going forward, and I would actually publish them when they're ready, unless the board has any concerns around that.
Sounds good and looks good.
And
All right.
obviously, if Chris or I see something that's unusual, we will make sure the board knows.
Sure.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Okay, well,
So going to the December 31st financial statements, we're halfway through the fiscal year now, and we are running a gain of about 2.3 million at this point. This is compared to a $4.1 million loss as of this time last year. So that's good to see. It's good to see that we're running in the positive. Claims expenses are up 4% compared to last year, but revenue is up 10%. And that is why we are seeing a gain, even though we have the increase in claims expense. The dental program, most of their gain is from the health program, $2.1 million. We have a small gain on the dental program of 132,000. So just as a reminder, when we set these dental rates for FY22, we actually proposed utilizing 1.4 million in net position to help cover program expenses. So we were actually expecting a loss. We are still running a small gain, mostly due to investment performance. So, but at least we're sort of stopping that sharp spike on the dental program of keeping to add to reserves, which we wanted to not do at this time. We feel adequately reserved in that program, and would like to keep the money with the membership. As I said, contributions have increased by 10% or 14.3 million on the health program. Claims expenses are up 161 million or 4.5%. And it's just always important to remember that, things can change dramatically. It is not in the blink of an eye, $1 million or $2 million on that health program is like a drop in the bucket. It's like one little snowflake coming down out there lately. So no, it's good. We monitor it. We want to keep an eye on it, but please always remember that certainly claims trends can change at any time based on timing of services or some sort of large case that could crop up. So far on the investment side, we've earned 208,000 in interest and dividends. That's compared to 204,000 as of last year, so pretty flat there. The investment market change is showing differently this year. Last year, we had a $1.4 million gain on investments. Last year was a really large gain year, a bit of an anomaly year in the investment market. But this year, we still are performing positively with a gain of 627,000, but down from last year. And just to give it some context, it really is the equity side of our portfolio that is pulling our weight right now. We estimate about 25% in equities and 75% in bonds. And the bond market is performing negatively from a market change perspective this year to date. And the equity fund is bringing that positive. So that's why it's nice to have that mix in place. And we'll talk about investments in a few minutes because I have a report to give on that. We have most of our assets are cash and investments, 64.5 million. We have 22.6 million as of 12/31 in member contributions receivable. That's always due to timing. That's about one month's worth of premium because premiums are billed about 20 days ahead of the month. The largest liability is prepaid contributions. So the flip of the receivables is that some people pay early. So some people pay a little later, some people pay early, but payment cycles, nothing of concern there. That's just a normal payment cycles of what I see from our member districts. We're in line with our budget. We've raised 54% of the expected annual premium. That is not going to hold at that higher percentage. That is partly due to the fact that Visters left mid-year. So that's skewing that percentage slightly. We're not going to be at 50-50 because we look at the contribution revenue for the entire year. The first 6 months, it's going to be weighted a little higher because the Visters Medicare population is removed for the second half of the year. And we've spent 56% of our expected claims. Again, I expect that makes sense because of the Visters relationship. It would be a little more heavily weighted, and also deductibles resetting on January 1st. So we would be a little more heavily weighted in claims expense in the first 6 months traditionally. And we spent 37% of our general operating expenses. That number tends to be a little bit low this time of year because of wellness, just because of the timing of wellness. A lot of the wellness expenses actually hit in January through March. That is basically the financial statements, unless someone has any specific questions. Alrighty,
No,
and feel free to always reach out to me. I'm always happy to answer questions or go through something in more detail if you later have a question. Happy to help.
Great. You know, I never know what all these protocols about accepting and voting on and stuff, it never really meant a whole lot to me, but I think as a matter of practice, we have always acted to accept your report. So I will ask for a motion in that to accept Chris's financial report.
So moved.
Thank you. A second. I think Peggy got the second in.
I did.
Any discussion before I say hello to Mark? All right. Okay, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? No, thank you. Chris, thank you very much. And I think we're going to stick with you for a minute, but hi, Mark, since I said I was going to say hello.
Hey,
You
no,
okay?
I'm sorry. I've had internet issues. I finally got on. My apologies.
You're apologizing for being late or for getting on?
No, this
All
time
right.
for being late.
Okay.
Just,
All right.
just do both, Mark. Cover yourself.
So the floor remains yours, Chris, I believe, if I understand.
Alrighty.
Right.
So we'll move into the annual investment performance report. So this is a report that is compiled with data as of June 30th. Because we haven't met, we didn't really have time on our October agenda, and it's been a while. So this is really back to 6/30 of 21 that we're reporting on now, but it is something that we provide annually. As usual, the investment vehicles have not changed from last year. All of our monies are held at People's United Bank, the Vanguard Group, and the People's Trust. They're all held within money market, bond funds, and equity funds. The bond funds and the equity funds are at Vanguard Group, and your money market is at People's United and People's Trust. So in your investment policy, we have two types of funds. We talk about Class A funds and Class B funds. So Class A funds are really, that's your checking account. That's the money at People's United. We try to maintain a reasonable balance there because the returns are not significant. It's in a Dreyfus account, which when I wrote this as of 9/30 was yielding 0.03%. It's, you know, exciting interest earnings there. The reality is that we need to keep money there because of the claims. I mean, we keep around 20 million in that account, which is a lot of money, but that can be a week's claims expense at Blue Cross. Usually it's not that high, but it's not unusual for me to see a weekly claims run that could be $10 million. So we need to keep good cash flow in that account, just in case anything happens, the members don't pay us for an extra week. Even if Blue Cross's billing gets delayed, it hasn't been happening in a long time, but even if that got delayed by a week, that would significantly impact our cash flow on the short-term basis. So we don't want to ever have to liquidate investments in order to pay for ongoing claims costs. So that's really your checking account. And like I said, it earns a very small yield. Then we have our Class B funds, which are at the Vanguard Group, and that's the short-term bond index fund and the total stock market index fund. So they're broad-based funds, put that in common language. I mean, basically what it is you have an equity fund and a bond fund that is capturing to look like the entire market. They're safe funds. They're funds that don't have junk bonds in them. They don't have risky equity investments. They are mirroring the entire market, but it tends to be the more stable side of the entire market when these portfolio managers look at what they invest in those funds. We don't own any securities specifically in our name. We are invested only in funds. So our mix per our policy, which we're going to talk about in a moment, is designated at 75% bonds, 25% equities. So at June 30th, when I looked at it, equities comprised 33% of bonds. 33%. Equities was 33% and 67% of the portfolio was in bonds. So we were off that target by about 9%. Our policy was very rigid. And it said, you know, this is our balance. It's 25%, it's 75% as of June 30th. So subsequent to year end, $2.2 million was transferred out of the equity fund and moved into the bond fund. This brought us back to that 75-25% split. The other thing we like to talk about in this report is a comparison to how we're doing. How are those funds doing at Vanguard? And there's a little graphic included in your packet. And basically what it's showing is it compares it to CPIU, just to give some sort of a reference. And also I can look at prior years. So basically, as of June 30th, the prior 12 months, CPIU was running at 5.4%, and our rate of return was at 11.5%. So we were well outperforming CPIU. And actually, you have the data behind the graph in there. And if you're interested, you can kind of look back over time. It shows the last few years. And what it definitely illustrates is that, you know, back in 17-18, we were only invested in bonds. And then we moved into the equity market. And you can see that this huge change in returns when we went to that investment vehicle. You know, before that, we were, 1%, sometimes negative rates of return on the bond market.
Okay.
So that was a great move to make. And, this last year we had, like I said, we had extremely high returns in the market. I would not expect the same thing to necessarily continue as of June 30th, 2022. It's been volatile. There's a lot of factors going on, as we all know, in the world, and that will affect our rates of return. Having said that, these are monies that we don't touch. We haven't moved them. This is an unrealized gain or an unrealized loss until you actually sell shares and move money over. And our money stays at Vanguard. That's why we don't keep such a small balance at People's. People's is for our operating funds. The Vanguard is a long-term investment, more reflective in concept of reserves, even though we don't call it a reserve fund. So any questions on the investment performance?
Chris, maybe I missed it. Did you guys have an estimate on, let's say that in this case, was forced movement based on the policy of 2.2? Is that, yes. Is that right? So if you didn't have the policy And I mean, and we were able to just keep it where it was making better returns. Do we have a ballpark on what it probably cost us to adhere to the policy?
I did not.
Okay,
Um,
I'm just
I
curious.
didn't calculate it. And that's one of those questions that it's a given day. Like,
Right.
if I looked at it as of, oh, let's see, this was as of June 30th. So if I looked at it, at the end of July, equities were probably still up. And so, yeah, we lost money because of that. But then if you looked at it as of right now, with everything going on in Russia and the Ukraine,
Right.
It would be a very different picture. I might be saying to you, oh yeah, we're better off with that $2.2 million over in bonds.
Sure.
So it's sort of more of a long-term approach that we want to take in philosophy. And that's actually kind of a good lead into my next subject, which is a change to the investment policy, which helps to sort of prevent knee-jerk reactions. So,
All right.
but I'll let Joel.
Okay,
Back
well,
over.
thanks, Chris. Well, since we accepted your financials, we probably ought to accept the investment performance report as well. So can I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second,
Okay, good. Any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? No. Okay. John, I don't mean to ignore you. I see both of your names on these reports, but I know how this works. So,
It's exactly right.
okay, then I will continue to offer the floor to Chris for the next item, which is an actual action item being presented to us. So Chris, go ahead.
So when we wrote the original policy, as I was just speaking to, we wrote the policy to say 75% bonds, 25% equities, period. Okay. So, we've worked with, on the VisBit side, a couple of different companies, investment advisors. One was Strategic Asset Alliance. We also worked some with the Vanguard Group. What came out of that work, along with a lot of other things, was that, the standard language in an investment policy is not to have such a rigidly defined number on the books, and to actually work within a range. And the idea is that you could have anything happen on a given day. So you could react not to a trend by rebalancing, but to the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine today, and everybody got nervous and the market went haywire on a specific day. And then 10 days later, everything looked differently. So the recommendation that you have in front of you is to protect our investments from that sort of immediate need to move large sums of money all at once on a given day. It's also nice to have a concept of staggering investments. If you were to move investment vehicles anyways, it's a good idea to stagger those over time, so that you're not moving money from one fund to another fund all in one day, because that could be very advantageous to you, or it could be very disadvantageous to you, and you don't really know. So, even when you're moving money around, it's good to stagger it over time. So that's the intent of this policy language change. Like I said, it does bring it to a place where it's more industry standard. And actually this afternoon, the original language that was in your packet, we didn't really change the intent at all, but Joel came back with some suggestions to make the more user-friendly to the reader, which I agree and I appreciate. I think it's always good to have another set of eyes from a different perspective. And I want to make sure that, while I understand the intent, I want to make sure that any reader of the policy absolutely understands the intent, and we don't leave room for questioning what was meant by the policy. So I don't know, Bobby Joe, do you have that? Are you able to bring up that other language that I worked on this afternoon? If not, I can read it, but
Did you send it to me in an email?
I did.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
But if that's a problem, I can read it though, but I just thought it might be easier for people to see it.
Would have been about 250, Bobby Joe.
thank you.
And it's the Word document there.
238.
Nothing like putting you on the spot. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I got it.
Okay.
Just trying to do a lot on a little screen.
Yeah. So the concept, let me get into that while Bobby Joe brings up the language. So the concept now is that
Here we go.
the target, there we go. The target is still 25% equity, 75% bonds. That is unchanged. But what we're saying is if the actual portfolio allocation changes from this target by more than 10%. So we need to get to a 35 or a 15% on equities. So we would not rebalance until we got to that point for 2 consecutive quarterly statement cycles. So that gives time. So even if it happens to be on a September 30th, that it's slightly out of balance, we wait to see if the market is just going to adjust itself, which it often does. But if on 12/31, it is still outside of the target by more than 10%, we will rebalance the portfolio by going halfway back to the target, to that 25% every 30 days until the balances fall within the target range. So we don't necessarily get all the way back to 25%. We take what the variance is, we cut it in half, and we do that right away. Then if it's still out of balance, out of the 25, then we continue to do that until we get to the point where it's backed within the 35, 65% range.
Okay. So this is the language that you want to add or actually replace.
Yes, in the investment policy itself, under equities, under item 4 or item 3, sorry, in the second section, just removing where the equity investments will not exceed 25% of net position, take that line out and replace it with this language,
Okay.
which will allow us more flexibility.
Okay. If everybody has a chance to read it, I will have one small suggestion. It has to do with adding back in the word financial. I think you probably meant it. The quarterly financial statement cycles.
Yes.
Okay.
we will put that in.
What's the thought between only going halfway back?
So, really that is the easy answer is it's industry standard. Okay. But the philosophy in my mind is that, again, you're not creating a knee-jerk reaction, so you're not saying, all right, well, our target was 25.75. So we want to create these parameters around that to allow for timing of the market. You don't want to shift that to just say, now all of a sudden we're going to go back to 35.65 on one given day. So the idea is that it's out of balance. We bring it part way back, see what the market does. It allows for 2 things. It spreads it over time so that if that was a particularly bad day to move it, you haven't moved your whole balance on that day because of the way the performance on the 2 funds was operating. And also it gives time for the market to naturally rebound. And so it's what I see in most investment policies, and it does make sense to me to do it more slowly. So it's the concept of that slow approach to bringing things back in line instead of making a large transaction on one given day.
All right.
Chris, we looked back at June, we were at 9%, correct?
Yeah,
So we wouldn't have taken any action. We would have let it continue to play out and not knowing the numbers exactly where we would be, but it might have been at today's date, we might have been back where we needed to be.
We may have been.
Yeah.
In this case, it probably continued with equities outperforming bonds, but it really depends where that was on September 30th. But like I have a feeling we would have started to rebalance on September 30th, but then on 12/31, we might have been done with our rebalancing. Whereas if we'd moved it all, we didn't have that opportunity to only move half and leave it alone where it is, with equities really outperforming in this case. So,
Okay. All that being said, are there other questions or thoughts? Seeing then, I guess we walked right into this. We need this wording in the form of a motion. Anybody want to move? Lisa, I think that was intentional. That hand-
Let's say.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Tracy? Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor of amending the investment policy as presented in this motion, please say aye. Opposed? We have acted to amend the policy. Chris, thank you for all of those reports and for your work on this motion. It seems to be rather.
great, thank you. And just so the board is aware, this is a policy that DFR has to approve. So now that you've approved it, it isn't official until DFR gives it the stamp of
All
approval,
right.
which I don't see any concerns with, but we
All
will
right.
forward it over to DFR.
All right, if you're going to be that way, okay. All right, good. Thanks again. All right, let's move on to our annual review. It says here of two policies, and they're related policies. They weren't adopted at precisely the same moment in time, but the ethics policy predates the conflict of interest policy, and the conflict of interest policy is the one that's actually been amended. So has everyone had an opportunity to review it individually, each one?
May I just make a comment that it is in the bylaws that we do this for DFR, and that I will be sending around the attestation for you all to sign after the meeting once we go through it. Yep, just as an update, I say attestation, just the conflict of interest statement saying that you're listing any conflicts of interest. So
Okay,
we need
but we're
to
not,
update them.
all right, we're not there yet, but yeah.
No,
I-
we're not,
I
we're not.
I understand. Okay. So I guess what I'll ask for first, if there are any thoughts about the wording of the Code of Ethics policy or its import. There needn't be. I don't want to force the issue where there is none. Any thoughts? Seeing none, we'll just move on. This is just a review. I want to be polite as chair and yield the floor to comments about the next policy, but I will have some thoughts, and it will culminate just in a request for permission to work on some wording changes. But has everybody been able to review the conflict of interest policy? I will say that for newcomers, and I'm not sure who qualifies anymore on this board, it's not intuitively obvious what to do in these disclosure statements. And what Bobby Joe was referring to as our obligation every year to sign a statement acknowledging whatever conflicts of interest or, whatever conflicts of interest may pertain to each of us individually. And it used to be a rote exercise. And in the wake of this policy, it became a little bit more than a rote exercise. Anyhow, so let me yield to you for just a moment, Bobby Joe, to restate what you just said about the disclosure statement.
Thank you. So I can share the screen with the conflict of interest policy if folks want, but once we review it, if everyone's comfortable with it, I will send out the statement of conflict of interest for everyone to re-sign for 2022 after the meeting, if you could return it to me.
Okay,
Would you like me to share the screen and show it?
sure.
Oops.
So really by skipping to the end is, I think, where you'll get the, or towards the bottom of the first page, I think. I think it's 7, isn't it? So if you look at 7, you'll see that to the extent we haven't performed this duty, then we are out of phase, because we were supposed, well, I guess this is our reorganization meeting. And so we're right on schedule afterwards. Sorry about that. But our obligation is to complete a conflict of interest disclosure statement. And Bobby Joe, you're going to take care of sending it around and asking for people to fill it out and sign it. Okay. All right.
Bill, I have a question about this.
By all means.
So this is all fine and dandy, and I see the need for this. But as board members, we don't know where our potential conflict of interests lie of other board members. So in other words, say, my wife works for Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I disclose the potential conflict of interest down on my form, and something comes up with that. Who's going to call me on that? Who's going to say, whoa, 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 you have a potential conflict of interest here? So how does that help us to disclose this without everybody knowing where the pitfalls may lie?
I can tell you what we do with Visbit. We do the same conflict of interest form for the Visbit board. And then we scan them and send them to every board member so they can see, even if there is no conflict, just so that they've all seen it at a meeting to know what was filled out on the forms.
That would be my recommendation as well.
It's easy enough to do.
Yeah, just so we all know where the potential pitfalls are, and hope, maybe there's none across the board, and that's great.
Yeah. Well, let me, I like the example you gave. The example I've been using over the years has been the closer call, which is there are members of this board. I used to be one who actually obtains their health insurance for themselves and or their families by VEHI. And therefore every decision within the board structure at VEHI that we make is somehow potentially fraught with a conflict of a financial conflict of interest on their part. And until you read the definition of conflict of interest ends with, well, Bobby Joe, can you go up to the bottom of the definition? There you go. The term conflict of interest doesn't include any pecuniary interest which is no greater than that of other persons generally affected. So to the extent that anybody's a member of VEHI or a subscriber, you actually don't have a conflict of interest under the definition here. But if you look at the top of the policy, it says we are supposed to avoid conflicts as well as the appearance of conflicts. And so to make a long story, just a slightly longer story, my inclination would be for those people who receive their health benefits through VEHI would be to acknowledge it on the disclosure form and point out on the form that you don't believe, in fact, it isn't, you don't believe it's a conflict of interest because any pecuniary interest you have is no greater than that of other persons generally affected. That's the likeliest place that I've experienced over the years for this policy to actually come into play. And that's how I would handle it. But I don't fill out your form. You fill out your form and you're free to reach a different conclusion about whether it's a conflict or not. But it's there. It's there.
That makes sense to me, Joel.
Good. Okay. Lisa?
Yeah, just a thought about this, since I'm one of those people. If in fact, because teachers or retired teachers get their insurance through VEHI, if it was interpreted differently, it would effectively mean that nobody who is eligible to be on the board, and that would defeat the my understanding of the function of the board.
Yeah.
So I agree with what you're saying, and I'm sorry, just was a thought.
Right, that really, in my mind, has always been the reason for conforming the policy's definition to the way it reads in the bylaws. It's all, as far as I know, the bylaws have always included this exclusion, which is commonly found in definitions of conflicts of interest in other organizations. If your interest is no greater than that of the people affected by the decision, then it's really not a conflict of interest.
But if someone made a motion to provide all board members with waived deductibles, that would be an issue.
Thank you, because your pecuniary interest at that point would be greater than that
Right.
of the persons generally affected. That's a
Sounds like a pretty good idea.
all in favor.
Minus the ethics.
Yeah. Okay, that's just my my addition to Gio's example. And so we can all expect to receive a blank form since we're not meeting live. I think we can be forgiven for not being able to sign the forms at this meeting. But our intention should be to fill it out and send it back quickly so that Bobby Joe can fulfill our obligations with DFR. Okay, that's taken care of.
And does that mean, Joel, that this will be, any potential conflicts will be shared throughout the board?
I have no objection to that. I think it makes good sense as a policy matter for us. At some point, maybe we want to add that to the policy, but in the absence of objection, I think that we should direct Bobby Joe to share our completed forms.
I almost think last year we scanned them all together and added them to the Dropbox, but if we
Okay.
didn't, that is an easy way to do it.
Okay, well, look at what you did, and if that accomplishes the purpose, then that'd be fine as well.
Yeah, just let us know when it's in the Dropbox.
I will do that.
That's fine.
Okay, good. I do not want to belabor this discussion since it's merely a review of existing policy and doesn't call for changes. But I've reviewed it a significant number of times. And the more I read it, the more I wish it read a little differently in several respects. I'll give you just a couple of examples. And basically what I want is your informal approval just to noodle around with it and come up with some proposed language that doesn't change the substance, but does change how it reads. The basic example for me is if you look at the implementation sentence at the top, it says, in order to comply with the obligations thus imposed, which is itself a problem, the board and its members, and here's the magic language, will adhere to the following recommended standards. Now they're either required or recommended. They can't be both. That's the kind of thing that I want to address in the policy, so to make it read better. There was another one that own little cheat sheet here. This place too. When I looked at the list of implementation standards, I keep, the first two use the words not give the impression. I don't know what that means other than that it's dependent, it seems to me, on the person to whom the impression is given. Anyhow, it just feels like it's not really the fault of the person giving the impression unless the person intends to give that impression. I don't know how to word that differently just yet, but it's the kind of thing that I would like your authorization just to look at. Several of these also really don't have anything to do with the definition of a conflict of interest. They're more on the order of ethical considerations. Well, for example, let's see. Oh, the first one is really, really interesting to me. I don't know. I was fortunately, I can't be blamed, or unfortunately, I can't be blamed for the language in the policy because I wasn't on the board when the policy was adopted. But I'd like to think that I would have raised these issues then. A board member would not give the impression that he or she would represent special interests or partisan politics for personal gain. What does that have to do with a conflict of interest unless there's some pecuniary interest involved, in which case it's covered in other ways? I just don't understand the notion of prohibiting a board member to convey some partisan perspective. That's not a conflict of interest. It may bear on ethics, but in any event, I don't want to be more long-winded than I already have. And several of you already certainly know my feelings about item 8, which is simply not related to the definition of conflict of interest anymore, and is as far as I can tell, both in disuse and should be discarded. But that's for a later meeting. In any event, I guess I'll revert to where I started. I'm asking for sort of informal approval of the notion of examining the wording of this policy at an upcoming meeting where we can actually dig into it a little bit and present it as an action item. Is that all right?
It's fine with me. I think you're right, Joel. I think, just taking a quick read, number 1 and number 2 are, I think, should be in something, but maybe in the ethics section.
Right.
I mean, I think they're important. But conflict of interest, I don't think really pertains there without reading all that over.
Yeah,
I think if your goal is to draft some language and run it by us, I don't see any harm in that. And if you're going to do that, you might as well put in that another conflict of interest that it's our policy to share any potential conflicts of interest.
Makes good
We're
sense.
going to rewrite it. Let's rewrite it.
That makes good sense to me. All right. Well, in the absence of objection, I'll go ahead and take on a extracurricular assignment, since I really don't have much to do with my time other than read and never mind.
I would just, for history's sake, for those newer to the board, when we started, we had a conflict of interest policy and no code of ethics. So, and the code of ethics was a later addition.
Is that right? It may be right, Tracy, but if you look at the bottom of these pages, I think it's the other way around. I think the ethics policy was adopted in 17 and this one in 18, and it was amended in 19, according to the bottom of the pages on which they appear.
I've been doing the code, the annual sign off on my code, on the code of ethics, since I started on the board. I bet you did too, when we first reformed as a intermunicipal insurance association in 2013. That's my recollection of the history. Okay. And then when we reformed a second time, and DFR increased their scrutiny of our policies, I think that's when we more formally readopted both and submitted for DFR approval.
Okay, fair enough. Well, whatever the sequencing, there's no harm in reviewing these things every several years and seeing if the wording actually works for them. But I guess I'm sure you're right that there were policies that preceded these, but this is the sequence in which these particular ones were adopted. Okay, well, that being said, I get, are there any other thoughts about the conflict of interest policy to be aired here? If not, then we'll wait for Bobby Joe to send those documents to us and we'll get them right back to her. Thank you all. Okay, moving along, we are here to review and accept the quarterly report of Vermont NEA. I don't know who to yield to. What do you think? Oh, Mark, you're here.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see you, so to speak. I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C. I submitted my quarterly evaluation report at the end of December. I think it was December 23rd. And at that time, I noted in the report that going forward, I'm going to just submit these reports after every quarter rather than trying to align them with a particular board meeting, because sometimes the board meetings happen to align nicely with the end of a quarter, and sometimes they don't. And it was creating something of a headache for me. And I imagine it caused some confusion for you as well. So the next of these reports will be coming to you, whether we have a board meeting or not, at the end of this month, at the end of March. The quarterly report that you received in late December and that Bobby Joe graciously reposted for this meeting covered a lot of ground. I obviously have it in front of you or have read it. If there's questions or issues or interests that you'd like to explore now in it, I'm happy to do so.
Joel, real quick for my edification, MA, you talk about that a lot, Medicaid.
Medicare Advantage.
Medicare Advantage. Just very quickly, give me a thumbnail sketch on why that's important, what it does.
It's important, and it's another item on the agenda where we'll talk in more depth about it. But Medicare Advantage is a particular privatized form of Medicare. It's a private insurance plan that contracts with Medicare, with the federal government, to offer Part A and B, and then additional services and benefits to Medicare recipients. And so you have traditional Medicare, and then you have Medicare Advantage. And the reason it's important to us is because approximately 7,000 teacher and administrator retirees, licensed school employees and their dependents transitioned to Medicare Advantage plans effective January 1 of 2022, this year. And Bobby Joe and I and John and others spent several months in 2021 facilitating that particular transition, which involved, as you know from my evaluation, contract negotiations, multiple meetings with Vermont Blue Advantage, which is the carrier, which is providing these new Medicare Advantage plans to the state teachers retirement system, with Vermont Blue Advantage and whoever else was involved in the process. So approximately 7,000 retired members of the Vermont State Teachers Retirement System and their dependents who were formerly members of formerly members of VEHI, are now getting their Medicare Advantage plans through Vermont Blue Advantage, which means they are now no longer VEHI members. So the Visters pool is split between retirees who are under the age of 65 and not eligible for Medicare, and people who are eligible for Medicare. And those who are eligible for Medicare and in a Medicare Advantage plan are no longer VEHI members. And we'll get to another point on this later, Gio, about a plan called Visters 65, which is still with VEHI, even though those members are in Medicare because of a glitch, if you will, not a glitch really, a rule that prohibited them from transitioning to Medicare Advantage. So sorry, that's long-winded, but that's why it's important to you.
Well, so help me out once more. If a person didn't have, forget about VEHI just for a minute and Visters. Sure. If a person didn't have this Medicaid Advantage, how does that put them at a disadvantage?
So when you turn 65, you are eligible for Medicare. And
wait, maybe I should have Joel explain this to me.
Yeah, and I've lost the capacity to think clearly.
You then have a choice between traditional Medicare and Medicare Advantage. Let's say you're not a teacher or an administrator.
Right.
You're not in Visters.
Right.
You can sign up for traditional Medicare and buy a Medicare supplement plan from any number of private insurance carriers in the country. Or you can sign up for a Medicare Advantage plan, and you don't need a supplement any longer because Medicare Advantage doesn't work like a supplement plan. It basically, go ahead.
What things does this pay for that Medicare doesn't?
In addition to being eligible for Part A and B, just like someone in traditional Medicare, Part A and Part B Medicare services, Medicare Advantage plans will often offer sometimes a dental benefit, a hearing benefit, a vision benefit, a discount on wellness programs at gymnasiums. It's called the Silver Sneaker Discount. So Medicare Advantage is authorized under law to offer a set of benefits that traditional Medicare is not allowed to offer. And again, generally it's hearing, vision, dental. There may be some other sort of benefits on the margins.
Transportation to doctors, that kind of thing. Knows.
In our case, the networks for Medicare Advantage are the same as they were prior to the transition to Medicare Advantage. But oftentimes when people go to a Medicare Advantage plan, they are in a particular network of the insurance company that sold them the Medicare Advantage plan. So Medicare Advantage is really privatized insurance that is offered to Medicare enrollees as a partnership, if you will, of sorts between the federal government and a private insurance carrier that agrees to offer all your Part A and B services. And in addition, dental, health, vision, or whatever other additional benefits are sort of on the table.
At the risk,
Thank you, Mark.
at the risk of being accused of making a partisan political comment, my understanding is that these Medicare Advantage plans were set into motion as part of a larger project beginning with George W. Bush's presidency to privatize Medicare.
There's a lot of controversy around Medicare Advantage plans, and what the research is clear about, and I think you may have seen some of this in my report, is that the Medicare Trust Fund is spending a lot more to cover beneficiaries in Medicare Advantage plans than they are in traditional Medicare. And the federal government is spending a lot more on Medicare claims and administrative costs because of Medicare Advantage. There's a strong argument being made from different quarters that Medicare Advantage is, as to Joel's point, is a means of privatizing a public benefit, Medicare. The Medicare Advantage plans almost went under at the turn of the century. They were not doing well financially. Private insurance companies didn't think they were a good risk anymore. And most observers felt like Medicare Advantage was not going to be on the horizon very much longer. And then the Bush administration, with latitude from Congress, changed the rules sufficiently to make these plans a lot more lucrative than they otherwise had been. And since that time, they have dramatically increased in enrollment. Approximately 40% of Medicare enrollees today in the United States now are in a Medicare Advantage plan. But again, they are very, very costly. And there are people who believe, and I happen to be one of them, that it is a vehicle for the privatization of Medicare.
Anyhow, are there other thoughts? We'll come back to this, I know. Are there other thoughts regarding the value, the quarterly report that Mark submitted? Tracy.
Thank you so much. I wanted to start by noticing the heavy lift that it took to facilitate the transition of the retirees to the Medicaid Advantage plans. And I am reminded that I think we see that change in plan design always seems to result in more challenges than we can see. I think we always know the unexpected is going to emerge, but we never know quite what it is that the unexpected is going to be and how much it takes. So thank you, Mark, and the rest of the team for all of that hard work. The second thing I wanted to acknowledge is that I see that there's been a lot of work evident in this report and at the end of the materials on employee education. And I also appreciate that very much. It's something that board members have been curious about and questioning for some time. I do have one request and that is that all training that is funded by VEHI, either in part or in full, is expressly open to all members, and that typically comes up with retirement workshops and/or any trainings. I know there haven't been many site-based trainings this year, but any trainings at the school level that might be provided by Vermont NEA staff, mostly Mark, because I think you're the only person that we really fund as part of our contract anymore. But again, I'd appreciate that be expressly open to everyone, whether or not they're an NEA member.
Just for edification, every workshop that's ever been done for 20 years for the retired members has been funded by Vermont NEA, not by VEHI. The retirement workshops have always been a benefit to VEHI because they educate retirees about their benefit plans, both retirees who are not yet eligible for Medicare and those who are, because they're for the longest time were in different sets of plans and still are. But when we were doing site-based trainings, and that would have been the first 19 or 20 years, they were in hotels and different venues around the state, somewhere between 8 and 12 a year, depending on interest. The cost of those venues, the cost of food and refreshments, the cost of the materials was borne entirely by Vermont NEA and still is. So if VEHI wants to offer retiree workshops in the future and wants to do them at sites in person, and I'd very much in fact like to be doing them at sites. I don't like a virtual training format if I can avoid it, but I haven't been able to avoid it for 2 years running. So if it's the will of the board that VEHI expand its duties to offer these workshops, then that cost would then need to be borne by VEHI.
Thank you, Mark. Are there other comments about the report? Lisa?
Yeah, I was looking, I don't know if you can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, sorry. I was reading on with the research that you've done, and a little bit of knowledge is dangerous, as we all know, but so I wanted to make sure that I was understanding this at least marginally correctly. And it had to do with the reference-based pricing, and it had to do with the hospital reimbursement rates. This is something that always amazed me is, you get your explanation of benefits, and they say that the hospital can charge you X amount, but you are only charged, whatever your
Right.
Blue Cross Blue Shield could only charge
Whatever
this.
Blue's negotiated.
Okay. So this I never really understood, and so I read a little bit about it. And basically, my understanding now is that hospitals can come up with a charge master. So in other words, they can determine the price for any type of procedure, and it has very little basis in reality. And in other words, it's not necessarily tied to actual costs. And the long and short of it is that Medicare negotiates with the hospitals for a specific percentage that they will pay for that. And then Blue Cross and Blue Shield, they also negotiate for how much the percentage that they'll charge. And so, am I okay? So far, so good or not? Dan?
You're doing fine. This is a labyrinth, and I
Okay.
am by no means an expert in it, but you're doing fine.
Yeah, but then the next thing that I was understanding is that what they did in Montana, of all places, kind of interesting, is that they are now, instead of Blue Cross Blue Shield negotiating for a percentage of the hospital, they'll now be negotiating as a percentage of the Medicare rates. Is that
Yes.
right?
So, yes. So
Wow.
private insurance carriers negotiate with the hospitals in their particular networks, and this is highly proprietary information, right? Each insurance carrier negotiates with hospitals and sets the rates that they will pay for particular services that are provided inpatient or outpatient by that hospital. And anyone who's ever spent any time trying to decode the hospital financing system and the reimbursement system knows that it's a very large and deep black hole. And the charge masters, which list all the charges for every service in a hospital, are or can be hundreds of pages long. And they don't necessarily reflect what's actually charged, except to people who are uninsured. Because insurance companies will negotiate their own rates. So Montana, as you know from my report, I mean, I don't know if I included this in the report or not, but I started about 10 months ago. I stumbled on an article about a woman named Marilyn Bartlett in Montana. She was working for the state. And the Montana pool, it was like it's sort of like a VEHI pool, but it was just for state employees. And the state ran the pool. It was about 31,000 people, about 4,000 less than we have at present. And the pool was in really dire shape. Its reserves were plummeting. Costs were rising. And the state of Montana came to Marilyn Bartlett and said, something's got to be done. Either we get these costs under control, or we're going to have to look at some significant benefit design changes. And so Marilyn is, by training, an insurance person. She has a lot of skills in actuarial science. She's a very numbers-oriented person. So she started doing the research, and what she discovered is that she believed hospitals were charging more than they actually needed to charge to cover their costs. And all hospitals have to report a lot of data to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services because they serve Medicare and Medicaid patients. And so she and her colleagues took a deep dive into that data and other information they were able to glean from claims and other costs for the state employees of Montana, and determined that the hospitals in Montana, and this was the acute care hospitals only, could meet their operating costs, provide high quality care, and do it at lower reimbursement rates. So Marilyn invited the hospitals in for negotiations. And she said, here's what we're going to do. I'm not going to pay you a Medicare rate. I'm going to pay you something between what Medicare pays and what you are now being reimbursed from private insurance companies. Because what you're being reimbursed from private insurance companies is far more in some cases than what you actually need to cover your costs. So let's arrive at what a fair cost is.
Wow.
You can provide the services. We'll make sure your operating costs and your doors stay open, and we get the benefit of lower costs. And she negotiated rates based on the Medicare rates. That was the benchmark. The benchmark was Medicare, and then they negotiated Medicare Plus. And the range of the reimbursements for inpatient and outpatient was somewhere between 225 and 250% of Medicare. And she reached agreements with, I think it was 15 or 16 hospitals in Montana. The end result is that over a 3-year period, Montana state employees pool lowered its costs by nearly $50 million. And I don't mean bend the cost curve. I mean, they actually reduced their costs by nearly $50 million. They restored the reserves of their trust fund. And not a single hospital closed its door, denied service to anyone. And that is still the case today. And what Montana basically determined is that what ultimately is driving most of the costs for its pool is medical price inflation. And the one way to get a handle on that is to actually negotiate directly with the hospitals, whether you're a state employee pool or a pool like VEHI, and try to set your rates lower using the Medicare rates as your benchmark. While I was researching this, it turns out that the Vermont State Auditor, Doug Hoffer, and this is also in my report, Doug Hoffer was also investigating it. And he looked at what the Montana system could potentially mean for Vermont's state employees. If we did what Montana did, benchmarked our hospital reimbursement rates to Medicare, what would that result in for savings to state employees? And he estimated the savings for state employees could be approximately $16 million a year. State employee pool is approximately 25,000 people. So it seems to me, and John and Bobby Joe and I are going to be meeting with Doug Hoffer and his team on March 21st to learn more about the report, why they sort of took the initiative and began investigating the Montana initiative in a Vermont context, and to see if it has promise for us here in VEHI. I think it's an initiative that at least warrants some serious investigation, because short of going right at the source of the price inflation problem, we're going to continue to see the kind of price inflation that we have today. And Medicare rates are public, they're transparent, they're intended to be fair. Now, hospitals will probably argue otherwise. But one of the things that's most of interest to me about the Montana initiative is that not only did they substantially lower the cost, but no one was deprived of any service, and no hospital closed its doors or reported, at least to the best of my knowledge, any sort of fiscal hardship. And finally, what I'll say is that one of the things that makes the Montana initiative interesting to me is that it's based on a really deep dive into the data analytics. What does it really cost to provide these services versus what are we actually being charged? And what Montana found is that private insurance companies were paying anywhere from 195 to 600% of Medicare rates for the same service, right? And then you can see, so what Bartlett did was to sort of really compress that to a range of somewhere between 225 and 250% of the Medicare rates. So I hope, Lisa, that's responsive to your question.
Well, that's a start. It begs another question, though. What more what's in the offing here for?
Well, I think Bobby, Joe, John, and I really need to take a deeper dive into it and learn as much as we can so we can report back to you. And also, if you've got questions or issues or concerns, we should set up an opportunity to talk about them in more detail. But I think what I recommended to Bobby, Joe, and John is that we at least talk with Hoffer and see what it is, why it is they focused on this, what it is they learned, how they learned it, so that we can assess whether it's relevant for us to seriously explore it as well.
Well, this isn't a VEHI experience, but it's my experience of the day. We just received a letter from our carrier, which is United Healthcare, informing us that its intention, unless something changes, to stop providing coverage for services connected with the University of Vermont Medical Center, Health Center.
Really?
Yeah. And I've learned that it is a typical negotiating tactic on the part of insurance companies to bring, its reimbursement of hospital services somehow into line too. But it freaks you out, I mean, it'll work out, I imagine. But as a recipient of a notice like that, that doesn't make you feel warm and fuzzy about the
one of the things you learn when you start studying hospital consolidation and negotiations with carriers is that as hospital systems become more and more consolidated than they are in the United States, the University of Vermont Health Network, for example, I think better than 50% of Vermont healthcare dollars flow to the University of Vermont Health Network. If you're an insurance company and you want to operate in Vermont, whether you're Blue Cross, Cigna, MVP, there's no way you can possibly function without the UVM Health Network
right
in your network.
So
when you come to the bargaining table,
right.
you're already at a great disadvantage because the hospital is so central to the healthcare system and to people's perception of it. I think it's very, very hard for Blue Cross, frankly, to negotiate much lower rates by virtue of how dependent every insurance carrier of the state is on a ever consolidating hospital system.
Joel, may I make a comment about this? So John and I were not prepared to talk about this as an agenda topic today. It is something that we agreed to listen to what Doug Hoffer has to say. The information that we've gathered so far is that it's been implemented in Montana, but it hasn't been implemented anywhere else. I will say that Medicare rates are not negotiated. They're given. Medicare comes up with a rate and they provide it to the hospitals. Medicare can come up with whatever rate that they want. The insurance companies have to negotiate what their rate is. And we're concerned that a group of 34,000 members would not have the same bargaining power that Blue Cross of Vermont has with over 200,000 members. I'm not sure how VEHI would have more bargaining power than an insurance company that has, 5 times the amount of members that we have. So there's definitely a lot more to talk about this. We agreed to have the conversation with Doug Hoffer, but we weren't prepared as an agenda topic today.
And I've done some research on it as well. I mean, I know it worked in Montana, but Vermont and Montana geographically are so different. I think it was tried in Colorado, North Carolina, some other places. There's no other state where it's been successfully implemented yet. So not saying it's not worth looking at, but not saying it's a magic bullet either.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I'm not saying it's a magic bullet either, right? And I never have, and I don't use language of that sort. And again, it's not an agenda item today. I just wanted to be responsive to Lisa's question. But I think by virtue of what we know so far, and again, I want to explore it more. I want to do a serious dive into it. And I think the conversation with Hoffer will be sort of the beginning for us of that process, in addition to conversations, brief conversations we've already had about it. But it's certainly something I think that warrants our attention. And I think Hoffer's report in particular, I think, compels us to give it some serious attention. The Senate Health and Welfare Committee heard from Doug Hoffer, I was either last week or the week before, and was very intrigued and interested by what he had to say on this topic. So I anticipate there may be some legislative interest in this as well. So it's important for us to sort of get up to speed with it as quickly as we can.
Good. Thank you. Thank you all for the discussion. Can I have a motion to accept Vermont NEA's quarterly report?
So moved.
Second, Lisa seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Thank you very much. I actually want to go back and I want to support or second what Tracy said about the work of you people in navigating through every freaking change that occurs in this system. Nobody outside of probably the people on this meeting have a clue about the depth of the work that is done on behalf of only 35,000, well, in this case, 40,000 people, given that retirees are implicated as well. And at some point, it probably would be a really good idea to find a way of providing some public tribute to the work that you guys do, beyond simply saying so in the relative confines of a public meeting like this. Anyhow, thank you very much. The next item is our management updates. I know that I'm responsible for the first one making it to the agenda. I'm not apologetic about it, but I do want to say up front that to be blunt, if you feel uncomfortable in talking about some aspect of this or other, I would just as soon have you say, I'm uncomfortable talking about this, rather than hedging language so that I'm left with more questions than when I start. The issue is, goes back to the 950 or so folks trapped in this Medicare Advantage transition. And its relationship to Part D, and I think I'll leave it at that. But it was clear that there was some information there was insufficient information in what we received to enable me to conclude what actually happened. I know what happened, but why it happened is unclear. So I'll yield there and see.
But this is sort of the second half of Gio's question about Medicare Advantage. And when Bobby Joe, John, and I learned that Vistas was transitioning its Medicare retirees and dependents to Medicare Advantage plans, probably would have been around the middle of 2020, the summer sometime of 2020, came to fruition pretty quickly. And at that time, Vistas offered 3 supplement plans, Medicare supplement plans. You got traditional Medicare, which you enrolled in for Part A and B services, and then VEHI was your supplemental plan. And there were 3 supplements, the JY supplement, the 300 comp supplement, and the Vistas 65 supplement. So when Vistas said, we're transitioning to Medicare Advantage, the goal was all of those supplement plans, JY 3 comp and Vistas 65, they would all become Medicare Advantage plans. So Bobby Joe, John, and I, and Vermont Blue Advantage and Vistas, we were all operating under that assumption. And we moved very conscientiously and intensely toward a January 1 start date for all 3 of those plans to become Medicare Advantage plans.
Mark, can I just
Please.
interject that the Vista 65 plan was medical only, no pharmacy.
Right, that's what I was getting at. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's an important point that Bobby Joe just made, because late in 2021, we get sort of an emergency email from Vistas saying, we've got a problem. The Vistas 65 population cannot transition to Medicare Advantage. And that was the first we'd learned of it. And the reason for that, as Bobby Joe said, Vista 65 offers medically everything traditional Medicare offers, but it has no pharmacy benefit embedded in it the way JY and 300 comp do. There's not even an aspirin. So when you sign up for Vista 65, you're going to get Part A, Part B services, just like everybody else, but you have no pharmacy coverage. So then you have to go out on the private market and you buy a Part D Medicare RX benefit. And they range greatly in cost, anywhere from like $11 a month to several $100s a month, depending on your medical needs. So Vista 65, just like JY and 300 comp, they're group plans, right? You don't buy them individually on the market, they're group plans. But Vista 65 requires you to buy your RX on the market individually. Vermont Blue Advantage, which offers these plans, these Medicare Advantage plans, was operating, I think, under the assumption, and this is somewhat speculation on my part, but I think it's accurate, that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, was going to grant them a waiver so that they could offer Vista 65 as a group Medicare Advantage plan and allow the people in it to still buy their RX benefit individually. And the reason a waiver was needed is because under the current rules, a group medical plan cannot be a Medicare Advantage plan if it also offers people the option for an individual RX plan.
Oh, God.
Now,
Who comes up with this shit?
Well,
I mean, this is
So,
what a ridiculous system.
Bobby Joe
Yeah.
and John may know more about this than I do, but I had no idea that Vista 65 couldn't
we
be
really,
Medicare Advantage.
we really would benefit from a
But
conversation.
I want to
just
say
like
it was
that.
November,
Yeah.
late
It was
October,
the
November.
17th of November when we
Yeah.
found out.
And so now Vista
Jeez.
is in all fairness to them, it's something of a panic moment for them because now they've got about 1,000 people in Vista 65 who by contract can no longer be with VEHI, but they can't be with Medicare Advantage either. So they're in this no insurance coverage zone.
Yeah.
And so
Jeez.
VBA doesn't get its waiver. So Vistas contacts us, we're like the fallback position, I guess, and says, help, can you keep these people at least for another year? So we very quickly pivoted. We negotiated another contract with Vistas that would allow us to continue to service people who were not 65 yet, who were not in Medicare, and hold on to this Medicare population of about 1,000 people. What that means is they are technically in VEHI. They're not in Medicare Advantage. They still have a Vista 65 plan, and they all, well, most of them have their own individual RX plan. At some point in the future, though, either Vermont Blue Advantage has to get the waiver from CMS to transition these people to Medicare Advantage. If they don't, then it's conceivable they may stay with us a little longer, or Vistas may say, you know what, maybe we don't offer Vista 65 in the future, and then they avoid this problem altogether.
Or they could add a drug card to their Vista 65.
Or they could add a drug card, that's right.
Yeah. And to be clear, if we didn't do this and they moved folks over to the plans, it would have automatically canceled all of their Part D coverages. So it would have automatically happened in the Medicare system if they moved them to Medicare Advantage, that all of their Part D would have been canceled. So over 1,000 people would have lost their drug coverage January 1st.
So if I understand it right, but for us, these people would be out of luck.
Yes.
Yes.
That's really stunning. That's just absolutely stunning. Mark, you said that somebody made an assumption. I think it was VBA made an assumption that it would. I don't even know that they needed an assumption that they needed a waiver, and that
I think
it
they
wouldn't be a problem.
knew they needed the waiver. I think they were confident they were going to get it.
They had
And they
applied
didn't.
for it, but they were declined.
Yeah, and my understanding
I'm
now
sorry,
is
they had applied for it or had not applied for
my
it.
understanding is that they had applied for it,
Yeah.
and I think they were surprised, frankly, when they didn't get it. And the
Okay.
news came just very, very late in the game.
Yeah. Duh.
The conversation, I think, with CMS is still ongoing about the waiver, but also I think we were told there's some interest in changing the law potentially at Congress to make this possible, which then would negate the
Oh.
need for a waiver
Sure,
potentially.
that'll work.
All of this is clear as mud to us at the moment.
That'll
All
work.
we know is that we couldn't let 1,000 people
Right.
just basically fall off the radar.
Did CMS offer an explanation for the denial?
I don't know. I mean, I suppose they did to Vermont Blue Advantage. They would not have to us because we weren't a party to those negotiations. We just heard about the fallout when the decision came down.
Okay, all right.
When
And I will
Mr.
say this, Visters not only reached out immediately, but they were incredibly grateful when we stepped up and acknowledged that in writing to us, that they deeply appreciated what we had done, because it wasn't just a matter of, you know, Bobby Joe, John and I calling Blue Cross and saying, okay, these guys are still with us. We literally had to renegotiate the contract and take care of a lot of sort of ins and outs in order for that to happen.
Has there been any similar acknowledgement by VBA?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Thankful, gratefulness. Yes, definitely.
Good.
When they called, Joel, when they called to tell us that this was happening, Mark, Bobby, Joe, and I all agreed that the number one priority was to find a way. We didn't know how, but to make sure that these people did not go without coverage.
Great.
We told that to Visters, and they were extremely grateful. So we're going to get you through this. The window is short. Mark's going to work on the contract stuff. We're going to talk to the Blues. We're going to get this done, and we got it done.
So is there, forgive me, but if the roof, well, the roof caved in already. I'm looking for the right image. What happens if there's no waiver, and certainly if there's no congressional legislation to this effect at the end of the
Then
next?
I guess in the short term, it's one of two things. Either we carry them for another year with
Again.
Vista's blessing,
I mean, a second
that
time.
Vistas would ask us, right? We just
Yeah.
maintain the status quo,
Yeah.
or it's within Vista's power not to offer the plan. So if it made that decision, then those 1,000 people would have to choose between the JY or the 300 comp Medicare Advantage.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I mean, the reason that they've done this is, you know, it's a fairly inexpensive plan for these
Yeah.
folks. And I think it's generally, Mark, I think you would agree that it's 100% covered, right, by most of the time for folks as far as
Yeah.
premium wise. And then they can pick whichever drug plan works for them. So if they
Okay.
need a very expensive one, if they only need a $5 a month plan, so it gives them a lot of flexibility.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's why it's for them to do.
So
When I
that's a
first
good
started
point.
doing retirement workshops, there were about 200 or 300 people in Vista 65. So this would have been about 20 years ago. And today there's approximately 1,000 people, and they are very happy in that plan. To Bobby Joe's point, remarkably, they don't have either RX needs at all, or they're very negligible RX needs. So they can get them filled with a very modest cost, save a lot of money on their premium. If you look at the Vista 65 premium, it is dramatically lower than the other premium because it has no drug benefit.
Yeah.
You know, RX is about 20% of every premium dollar. You take that off the premium, the number plummets. So those folks are getting a great deal on premium. They're getting their Part A and B services through Medicare, which are very comprehensive. And then, as Bobby Joe said, you can walk into a pharmacy, you often see advertisements. Part D, $11 a month, $15 a month. I don't know what you get for that, but for these folks, it's sufficient. And remember, with Vistas, you're not locked into your health insurance plan for life like you are with your pension. So you can choose among the three options that currently exist. And every open enrollment period, if it's not working for you for whatever reason, you can change to a different plan.
Right.
So there's flexibility there for those.
Boy.
So if I
Well,
could just let you know
yeah.
about just the administrative, so we do charge Visters an administrative fee each month. Even for the members who are no longer technically with us. So because of the administrative work that we do, because they're part of our wellness program, because we do some additional work on the under 65 group, they do pay us an administrative fee on a monthly basis, as well as pay us kind of a subsidy fee, which is the difference between the pro forma rates that they should pay and the actual billed rates that they bill their folks. So we do have a separate monthly bill that just started in January of 22 that we bill them. This first month was for $200,000, 202 actually. So there's an administrative fee that we are collecting from them as well, which I definitely feel like we've earned. Certainly, Mark.
Putting it very modestly and kindly, yes.
We've done a lot of contract work. Mark has actually led a lot of the contract work, so thanks to him for that. And Mark has also received a lot of calls from the fallout of the transition to the new health plans for January 1st. So he's received a lot of calls, whether it's, my drug's no longer covered, I need prior approval, I need help. Mark's taken a lot of those calls as well. So kudos to Mark on this.
Thank you. Kudos to Mark and to you and to all of you. And it seems to me like, as January 1st approaches, something like this always happens.
Yes, yes. And this was a big change for, generally in an elderly population that have been in the same plans for, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So it was a big change.
I remember, this is my own war story, years ago, advocating for retirees to move from JY to, I guess at the time, the 300 comp plan, which I assume is the predecessor of what we're talking about here, because the premium structure was lower and the coverage was just as good. And here we are.
One of the ironies about this transition, there are actually several, but one of the things that has made me laugh quite a bit is that I spent a lot of years, and I'm sure Bobby Joe, and before Bobby Joe, Laura, we'd get calls from people in the Vistor system. Should I go to JY or should I do 300 comp? And JY was so much more expensive than the 300 comp, and it didn't offer anything more. Right? So we would always advise people, 300 comp is your better deal. You can choose whatever you like, but financially, you're smarter to go with 300 comp for these reasons. And over the last 10 years, there was a major migration out of JY to the 300 comp.
And now they're all going to come at you and say, see, I told you I shouldn't make
Well,
that.
here's the thing is that now the prices between JY and 300 comp, the monthly premium for single, they're almost identical. It's a $7 difference between the JY and the 300 comp plan under Medicare Advantage. And I don't fully understand why that is. So now I got people calling saying, well, why? It's only $7 difference a month. Why wouldn't I go back to JY and I'll just pay a copay? And that, in fact, several hundred people did just that. They basically went back to JY after we spent a decade trying to convince them to go to 300 comp. So anyways, there's more to come with this Medicare Advantage stuff, a lot more, but at the moment, things are relatively quiet, except for the occasional calls that are coming in.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to edify me about this, and I appreciate everybody else accepting the fact that they had to sit through it. It's really a complicated world. Unbelievable. All right. Thank you again. The next item is headed member education work.
Yeah, so back in August, not in our last meeting, but the one before, we had talked, there were some questions about member education, and one of the questions kind of, it took me by surprise a little bit, talking about, the things that we've done, and I wasn't fully prepared to answer at the time, but I spent some time afterward kind of putting together what we had done with member education, because while we weren't out in the field as much as we were to begin with, we did do a major change to our website to help people navigate the change. So as you recall, when the plans first came into effect, it was locally bargained. People had all different kinds of different agreements as far as how much the HRA was covered. Did they have first dollar coverage or last dollar coverage? And then when the commission came through with the new benefit that started in January of 2021, people really had to understand what they had today and then what they were going to in 2021. So we did this complete website redesign that I wasn't prepared to talk about at the time, but I wanted to just let you know what was done. And this is work that, I think I kind of built the shell. Mark helped a ton, of course, with the wording and the verbiage that was used. But let me just show it to you. And I'll go through it quickly, but I just wanted to share it because I do think it's an important of what we did. So just one moment. Excuse me as I skim down. So just to let you know, this is something that I shared with business managers, HR folks, and something that we sent out via our campaign monitor. It's called, it's how we contact our group members. So we created this decision support site, and we launched it to everyone. This was sent out not only by me toward the HR folks, but Mark shared it on the union side as well with his local union leaders and UNICEF folks. So we basically came up with a decision website that helped folks say, this is what I have today. This is what it's going to look like tomorrow, because for a lot of people, they were going to have a really different look with the new commission benefits than they had before. So we created this where you could click on what benefit you had, whether you were a licensed employee or a non-licensed employee. Again, this was new for folks. They had never been segmented in that way. So they had to choose whether they were, licensed or unlicensed. And then there happened to be this little, just a small quadrant of people that were outside of the law that was passed. So there was this little group of people that were considered confidential employees that were not necessarily included in this. So we had to, kind of identify those and let them know what their options were as well. So they would choose what their segment was. And again, this is where it talked about, how do you know if you're a licensed person or if you're a non-licensed person or if you're outside of this altogether? So we did a little work on that. We did a really thorough FAQ of all the different things that talked through not only the health plans, but the HRAs, the HSAs, and the difference that they would be looking at for 2021. So again, they would choose if they were licensed or non-licensed. It would take them to which health plan that they had currently. So it was, they kind of went through and said, okay, I'm a licensed person. I have the gold CDHP plan. And then it would ask them what type of funding they had at that point. Did they have an HRA? Did they have an HSA? Or did they have nothing? Because it could potentially change for 2021. Once it got to that point, it would tell them exactly what it was changing for them. It would say, you can keep your, so in this person's particular situation, their HSA was going away if they kept their gold CDHP. So they would have to move to a silver plan, or they'd have to move to an HRA. So we tried to come up with a way for everyone to go through and select which plan they had, so they knew exactly what they were getting for 2021.
Great, boy.
We had different charts that we created with their out-of-pocket exposures. We also came up with, full, this is how much it would cost you monthly. This is how much it's costing annually. So we tried to create all of these different things to give employees as much information as they could use to make the decision that was right for them. So this was what was launched in the fall of 21, in the fall of 2021. And then in 2021 for 2022, we had to update the website and remove all of that because it was no longer valid. And Mark and I did a lot of work on a presentation that we had planned on doing a video to release to folks, but since the benefits really weren't changing for 2022, we decided to wait till the new commission benefits take effect for 2023. So we'll be doing a video of these benefits for next year. We'll be doing that this summer and fall. So, we've had to kind of come up with some different creative ways since we haven't been in the field for so long. But these are different things that we've done and that we've provided to HR folks, provided to UNICEF directors to help educate folks in the field. We just wanted to make sure that you realized, although I wasn't really prepared for that question back in August, that we had.
Why not?
I was like, oh, wait, I know we did some. So we just wanted to make sure we touched base on that.
That's a lot. That really is obviously a lot of work.
It was a ton of work. It would, and as far as the system, it was done by Lorraine from our IT side at VizBiz, and she did a ton of work. So,
God, just hope people use it. It's just, it's just so complicated. Just the way it is. Great. Well, thank you for that. Good. Okay.
Joel, I had a quick question. Is that okay?
Sure.
So the quick question was twofold. One, I just want to acknowledge what Joel was just saying. Like, I appreciate that when the creation of these type of asynchronous ways to educate people about these things is a huge lift, and to do it well in a way that people can access. But it's also really important because there's really that face-to-face type of contact, and the education we do there is great. And there are people who need that. And there's other folks who don't, they want to be at home on the laptop and trying to figure it out with their stuff out on the kitchen table too. So, so I appreciate having both of those kind of mediums as a way in which we educate people is really important. I'm curious about what Joel just said, which was, geez, we hope people use it.
Yeah.
And do we have analytics? Do we do any tracking of any of our stuff around that? And to what extent?
I will ask Lorraine if we have the access to that type of analytic information. I mean, anecdotally, the HR folks all told me that they shared it with their folks, but I would like to see the click count if it's something that we can get. And I don't remember if I had asked her for that before, but I definitely can.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Zach. Other questions before we move on? By which I mean yield the floor still to Bobby Joe. Okay, Bobby Joe, you're on.
Okay, so back in November, we received word from our web developer, which is called Blue House Group. This is a group that we've worked with for, I think it's 15.
You said Blue House Group?
Blue House Group. They're actually out of, I think are they in Jericho?
I'm sorry, but you know who lives in that house?
I don't.
The Blue Man Group, but that's all right.
Blue Oyster Cult.
Yeah, really. Sorry. We'll talk later. And I apologize.
Bobby Joe's too young to get that joke.
It's getting late. Bobby Joe, you continue or start over, do whatever you want.
That's fine. So they let us know in November that, and they've been telling us this for a while, to be fair, that our website has reached the end of its useful life. They have been patching it, band-aiding it, using crutches. I mean, it's been limping along for a long time, and they finally said, we're done. Like, we can't keep patching this. We can't keep chasing all of these different issues. So the problem is that this was built about 15 years ago, and the coding has just changed so much in the last 15 years. And apparently the way that they coded it to begin with was a really unique way to do it, which is a lesson that they have learned since then. But we have dozens of programs on our website, and the entire PATH. So this is not the VEHI website, but this is the actual PATH Health and Wellness website, which has online learning. It has the adventures. It has the summer challenge. It has the Healthy Life survey. It works as a huge database of information and numbers and tracking. So each year, we have going on close to 15,000 accounts. We have over 11,000 accounts that have been used in the past year. So those are what they consider active accounts. And then over 7,700 members registered for our ongoing adventure that's happening right now. So for the last 31 years, we've done this 10-week adventure, and it's grown in popularity. It's grown in scope over the past 31 years. And this year we have 7,700 people currently involved in this adventure. Everything is done online. All the videos, there's a complete, anyone that's, I think, I'm sure Peggy and Lisa are familiar with this, probably Zach as well. It's the backbone of our wellness program is this website. So they've told us that we need to, we basically have to rebuild it. And this is something that it's costing us a lot of money on a monthly basis for the support, because every time something changes, it requires a lot of support. And we're paying out quite a bit of support hours each time any type of functionality is changed. We did ask Blue House for an estimate and a timeline of when this would happen. And keep in mind, we have to have this needs to be happening simultaneously. We need our current website to continue to work while this other one is being built. They came back in the end of January and asked us for 6 more weeks to come up with even just a price tag and the timeline of all the work that needs to be done. There's so much information that's out there to be documented and so many layers of information. So we are expecting that by the end of March. What we could do, and we look to you for guidance as well, is do an RFP to see, does it make sense to continue with Blue House Group or should we use a new vendor? Obviously, with the 15 years of history and data and everything that's already in place, Blue House Group has a big lead as far as what anyone else could do. Anyone else coming in, I think, would have to learn everything that's out there and then come up with their price and their timeline. And things are going to be missed along the way and things will be underestimated likely. So we want to see what the price tag is, what the timeline looks like, and then think about, and I'd like to work with my IT person, Lorraine, to make sure that we're selecting the best vendor that works for us and see if it makes sense to do an RFP or if it makes sense to move forward with our current vendor. So the good news is that this belongs to us. So it will be a relatively expensive project, but it is something that can be capitalized. It's over about, I think Chris said 10 years. So it is something, it's a capital expense that can be kind of pushed out over the course of 10 years as opposed to one budget hit the first year. Did I miss anything, John, or is there anything you wanted to add to that? And happy
we've
to.
got some preliminary work that we have to get started on in this cycle, just to find out what it's going to cost and what's involved in it, and then it would be in the next go round. But yeah, it would be pretty expensive. But it's like, it's like a little mini Y2K all over again.
It doesn't feel like anything that we can say we can't do, because again, this is the backbone of our entire wellness program that we have so much invested in. I know, I think it was Gio actually that brought it up in August or October, talked about getting the wellness team in here to talk about everything that they do. So it's certainly still something that we can do and have them in when we meet next. Maybe we would talk about the website at that point as well. So just two other thoughts on that, this gives us the opportunity for one to go through and say, is this really something we want to continue to offer? Is this something we want to remove from the website? And it also gives us the ability to have an integrated application for phones as well, because that's not something that we've had, but it's something that people really want, is just access to the PATH website on their phone as an app. So that would make a lot of sense as we do this as well.
Thank you. Good. And it's already on the agenda, suggested agenda for the next meeting.
Yes.
I wonder how it got there. Okay.
Well, we had talked about having just talking about wellness in general. So.
Right. Okay. Good. Okay. Thank you very much. That's I've been through that myself back in the day for a couple of times. Of what are you going to do about a website that no longer is useful for anybody? It happens periodically. Okay. Well, we're on to discussing future agenda items. The two that are in my head from this meeting, in addition to what's listed there, are anything that I personally come up with around the conflict of interest policy. Not quite sure how to do this in a public body, but I would appreciate hearing from anybody with your own thoughts about what might be included. And I guess we can do that by communicating to everybody about them. But anyhow, if you have thoughts about it, I'd appreciate hearing. And the second one is some fleshing out of the discussion we had about hospital pricing and the research that Mark and Bobby Joe and John have been talking about. Those are the two items that I've heard added to it. Are there any other thoughts right now? Others will come up, I'm sure.
And then from my side, we'll have the audit engagement for the upcoming FY22 audit. And also I will be bringing the budget to the next meeting for your approval.
Good. Tracy.
Was there a change in timeline for rate setting for something that we need to be ahead of?
That's a good question.
Yes, so that is that's listed as a potential. Well, it's actually we really need it to be in the month of June, not only June, but specifically between June 23rd and 27th. Visters has moved off of our renewal cycle with the actives to a calendar year, which means that their renewal, instead of going in on
January.
October 30th or 31st, it'll be going in on June 30th. So we will need to have a meeting, whether this is the full meeting or we just have a quick meeting that week. We do need a meeting to approve the visitors renewal the week of June
That
23rd to
component.
the 27th.
But for the population generally, no, there's no change.
Actives remain the same, right?
Got it. Okay, good, thank you.
Yep.
All right then.
I would just, Joel, I just wanted to add that it's not really an agenda item, but by April 15th, Chris and Bobby Joe are working on the DFR's 5-year audit. And I'm also doing the same on the VISBIT side. So there's a lot of work that has to be done in the next few weeks. So that's going to take up the bulk of our time getting that done as well before we have another meeting. It's just I'm new to it, but Chris has been through it before, but it's every 5 years. It's a major audit of
Well,
a lot of paperwork.
Well, I'm sure the visit board will help you.
So DFR will either be coming in July or October. They have yet to decide which time frame it will be.
Okay,
I'm voting for October since I have an audit in August and September already to
that
prepare.
sounds awfully logical. So
Yeah.
be prepared.
But they'll probably come in July. So
Okay. All right then. I see these words. I'm not quite sure what to do with them. Oh, these are also future agenda items. But Bobby Joe, you included them simply because they ought to be flagged to our attention. There's no need to talk about them here, right?
Correct. They
Okay.
should just be on it's just
Okay,
as a,
good. Understood. Now that's helpful. Okay. All right. I think we are at the point of attempting anyway to set a next board meeting. Any thoughts about by when we should have that next meeting? It feels like we're ready to have another meeting, given the number of things to talk about. But on the other hand, I won't be here in April. So
We're looking at an early May meeting. Does that make sense?
it seems to from my perspective.
I would suggest we schedule one for the window that's necessary for rate setting,
Right.
and then backwards map from there if we need additional meetings prior to that.
Okay. And Bobby Joe, what did you say? I forget already. By when do we really? Oh, you said between June 23rd and 27th.
correct, yes.
Okay. Well, all right. Why don't we talk about it? I don't mean here. Why don't we talk about it offline and see what we can come up with as a plan for either the next meeting or the next two meetings. Okay.
Sounds good.
Are there other thoughts? Someday we'll be in the same room. Was that a laugh or a snicker?
I'm only coming if the Captain Kirk cutout comes.
I bought this house to fix up and it had a bunch of garbage in it. We were taking it out and my daughter goes, "You won't believe what I just found. It's a life-size Captain Kirk cutout." And I was like, I gotta keep that.
Absolutely.
Somebody threw that out? Oh,
Yeah, well, they left it behind. Let's
Oh,
put it
all
that
right.
way. They probably didn't know. I'll bring Kirk when we come in person.
Well,
I'll bring him.
they went somewhere where no cardboard cutoff has been before. So that's another reference. By the way, I sent Bobby Joe a link to the Blue Man Group. If anybody else wants it, I'm sure she can provide it to you.
I'm live, actually.
Okay. Well, I can crack wise for the remaining 33 minutes, or somebody can actually make the motion to adjourn that I suggested 2 hours ago.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Too bad. Okay, so folks, thanks a lot. We'll see you when we see you.
All right. Thank
Enjoy
you.
enjoy the spring because it's coming. All right.
Take care.
See you.
Bye-bye.